So someone comes in, they say to me, I want help with my fear. And they say, I have a lot of fears. And I go, okay, so you have a lot of fears and you want to understand fear better so you can manage your fears. Sure, they're willing. So then I say, what's your methodology for understanding fear that then has many different forms of fears? What's your methodology? Oh, well, their methodology is to come to me, Dr. Fisher, and ask for help. Their methodology is to maybe go look at a self-help book and ask for help. A lot of possibilities. But then I ask, what is your knowledge that you're going to draw from to know fear and understand fear, right? So that you can manage it better. And all the fears that come from that basic relationship you have with fear, with yourself. Well, then they start to get a little puzzled by this inquiry. And I go, well, let's even go deeper. And let's really make the puzzlement worth the effort of getting to the source, the causal, deepest sources, at least as best as we can tell. So the conversation quickly went from dealing with the fears, particular and specific, more superficial, down to the actual methodology of knowing and understanding fear. And that's where my work as a philosophy of fearlessness, and sometimes use a philosophy of fearism with that. Philosophy of fearism comes from the work of Suga and others. And these are two methodologies. You see, philosophy of fearlessness, philosophy of fearism, coming to challenge how we best know and understand fear. And then from there, okay, well, then we can figure out how to best manage it. Well, usually that's a lot deeper questioning than most people want to inquire, and that's the very nature of fearology, fearlessness, and fearism. So that's what this video is about. That's what my work is about. And that's why I want to continue to help people with basically establishing and growing patiently and sincerely and with commitment, not escape and quickly looking for the quick solution to your fears. Your symptoms usually is what you're actually going to solve or perhaps find relief from. Not against that, but if that becomes your whole mode of methodology, your amount of understanding of fear will be very little. And that's basically what philosophy is about, is getting to the deeper understanding, right? And the methodologies that you bring to understanding itself as a process, as a way of knowing, as an experimentation, as an inquiry or co-inquiry with others. So today we're going to co-inquiry a little bit. I'm going to bring forward a little bit of a lecture from Jiddu Krishnamurti, The Awakening of Intelligence, a book that I've found interesting bits that I want to share here from his conversation of how to know and understand fear in that way, and be aware of our methodologies of knowing. So he's going to talk about the methodologies of seeing. He's going to use that language, which could also be the methodologies of awareness itself. So how are we going to bring awareness through particular lenses, perspectives, methodologies, or even, as I say, these two philosophies that I've mentioned earlier, philosophy of fearlessness and philosophy of fearism. How are we going to bring those to the inquiry of understanding fear, knowing fear? Sometimes this is all called the epistemology of fear, if you want to get metaphysical about it in more technical jargon. But you will see I do write a lot about the epistemology of fear, and you're welcome to look up that in more details of what's behind it. Today, I don't want to go into that kind of depth and all the contexts and reasons that I go into studying it. I think some of this will come clear of my motivation and interest in how I teach about the study of fear, to put it bluntly, so that we actually can have a study of fear. Yes, for the purposes of managing fear, practically, pragmatically, is important. And the world needs to learn how to do this socio-culturally, institutionally, schools, medical profession, etc. But I am just doing a real slow step into this, so that you get an actual, maybe even shift today in awareness of your methodologies of knowing fear, right? Of knowing the knowledge that's available, could be wisdom that's available, but also your habits. So we'll be talking about the seer in Krishnamurti's terms, right? The observer, the seer, who's looking at fear, our topic, subject, right? Because that's why the person came in to see me. They want to see about how to do fear management better. So there's always an observer seeing. But the question in methodology here, philosophically, will be, but who is doing that seeing? Who, from what perspective? Let's go into the example. Jiddu Krishnamurti Murti was a philosopher. Long background, you can look up his name on the internet if you like. Find out more about him. Sitting in front of an audience is how he mostly taught. That was his pedagogy, his dialectical inquiry, kind of Socratic in this sense. Question, answer, probe, see if we can go deeper together. Not trying to make somebody look stupid in dialectical pedagogy, not trying to beat them through a logical argument necessarily. But you are dealing with defenses and resistances. And there's a reason for that. Let's get to that. In other words, what are the defenses to actually getting to know fear and thyself? What I sometimes say, getting to know thy fearful self is first step to knowledge, wisdom, compassion. Krishnamurti, you say the me is seeing, therefore is afraid. He says that to somebody sitting in the audience because they says, well, I am looking from me at how to understand fear, knowledge, reality. Krishnamurti says, the me is seeing. You're looking through the me to see the fear, the interest. And then Krishnamurti says, what will you do knowing any movement of the me is still furthering that fear, ultimately a fear of fear itself? Questioner says, I don't know. Krishnamurti, what do you mean by you don't know? Questioner, to me, the me is all I know. Krishnamurti, no, sir. We have made it very clear. Do listen to this. There are two actions of seeing. I'm going to call those two awarenesses first tier seeing and second tier seeing. My language. Back to Krishnamurti. Two actions of seeing. Seeing the map non-directionally, non-purposively, just seeing. And then there's the second one. And the me seeing. The me with its purpose, with its drive, with its directive, with its intentions, with its resistances. It sees and is afraid to do this or that, whatever it is. Questioner, are you using the word see now in the way in which you normally speak of being aware? Krishnamurti, I am just using the word seeing for a change. That's all. Let's play with it. That's what he's basically saying. Questioner, sir, You tell me there is a state in which you can see without the me, but I have never experienced that. Fair enough, apparently. Right? Sounds very confirmed. I've never experienced that. Well, that may or may not be true. You may not be aware that you've experienced it. It may have actually been an experience, but you didn't register it, didn't record it, that there is a possibility, that there is a first tier and a second tier way of seeing. This first tier way, again, my language now, first tier way is what Krishnamurti is referring to as the way of drive, purpose driven, and he's ultimately referring to ego driven consciousness, awareness. Always after a mission, always after trying to get rid of the problem, the fears, to get rid of the ignorance. So I want to have knowledge, whatever it might be. I want to be good, purpose, directionality. See? I mean, one level that sounds really normal and even healthy, perhaps, the surface level, but that's only if you're looking and not challenging critically, as Krishnamurti is here, as I am here. There is a second tier way of seeing, of awareness, second tier that I would call fearlessness. Excuse me. Okay, let's go on and just hear Krishnamurti a little bit longer. I'm not going to read much more. Krishnamurti says, well, do it now. Do it now, sir. Experience yourself seeing what you're looking at, what you're trying to understand. Do it now. I am showing it to you. There is the me that looks at this whole map of violence and therefore is afraid and resists it. And there is another seeing which is not that of me, which just observes non-objectively, non-purposefully, and says, I just see it. This sounds simple, isn't it? Says Krishnamurti. I see you have got a green shirt. I don't say I like it or I dislike it. We're on second tier now. I just see it. But the moment I say I like it, could sound positive, is already me justifying or prejudicing or analyzing what I'm seeing, the green shirt. Even if I say I dislike it, Krishnamurti is saying, I also am prejudicing what I am actually seeing. Because you see, the intention behind the seeing of the green shirt was already, do I like it or do I not like it? See, it had purpose. It had meaning, trying to connect some kind of judgment, evaluation. You go, well, okay, that's not totally a bad thing. No, not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. Krishnamurti is not saying it's a bad thing. He says, but where does it lead? Are you aware of it? Of that first tier thinking of, quote, something with purpose and looking for meaning and definition and categorizations, right? Good shirt, bad shirt, like it, don't like it. And then what does that say about how you perceive other beings, living beings, not just a shirt? This is really the teaching here. So Krishnamurti says, I just see it. But the moment I say I like it is already the me saying I like it, and therefore all the rest of it follows. This is sufficiently clear, verbally at least. And then Krishnamurti, I'm just going to skip a bit. Questioner asks, could we go into this question of why this looking without the me is so very difficult and happens so rarely? Krishnamurti, I don't think it is difficult. Don't say it is difficult. Then you are stuck. Then you have blocked yourself. So seeing without me and that purposefulness that is behind the me. And I'm arguing that easily could be labeled the ego self, the partial fragmented self, the deficit needy self that needs something from the situation of which it's seeing. So now bring that to the experience of studying fear. Exactly, that's the point of this video, which I will keep short. Something maybe you want to go over a few times. A discussion about this is that if you are wanting to make fear the topic, and I suggest you do, it's a great education to understand fear, then you're going to have to ask and have a methodology that continually reflects back to know thy fearful self in the knowing of fear. I need both. I need the reflection going inward. I need the reflection going outward to understand fear in all its different manifestations, and thy fearful self that might be, in fact, say fact, but at least empirically in the philosophical tradition of Krishnamurti, myself, and our own critical theorizing, and others, is the ego self first tier way of seeing, is the dominating way, especially in the West, which I'm speaking to because that's what I know where I live, modern, contemporary, postmodern world, is leading the way, is leading the investigation on fear itself, and therefore is leading the way knowledge is shaped about what I bring to the inquiry, what I bring to the knowledge base to understand fear and manage fear and communicate about it. It's biased. It's biased within a first tier framing that arguably Krishnamurti is saying is already afraid. It's already coming from that place. And we could add other theories about that in terms of a fear of death, a fear of deficit, a fear of lack. Many different philosophical views and theories could be brought to how this ego self, viewer, seer, observer already is preconditioned through culture and through what Krishnamurti often calls the habitual, the conditioned already by society, cultural expectations, parents, schools, institutions, laws of how you ought to observe the world, how you ought to observe fear, and how you ought to manage fear and know fear, etc. All of that's being challenged by a second tier way of knowing, which Krishnamurti says is not that difficult. It actually, he would probably say in other places, and I would suggest it's a good thesis, there is a primal condition, there is a more, quote, pure condition of knowing, but also a very matured condition of knowing, that primal can be matured into very sophisticated knowing, which someone like a Krishnamurti is a meditator, is a philosophical thinker all his life, and dedicates his whole life to this as a contemplative, brings a much more sophisticated way to know and see, and he sees this distinction. There is a shift from the first tier kinds of knowing, need-based, to a more being-based, non-need. I don't need to like it or dislike it. I don't need to critique it necessarily or put it up or down. I just need to first have the skill set. It's not ending there, but it's a skill set to just see, just know, see what is there real already before those first tier, the me perspective starts to come in. And that me perspective is almost like a political perspective that already has an ideology it wants to impose upon the vision of reality and the world and on the knowledge about fear. And Krishnamurti says, and many others I would say as well, it ends up being a philosophy of control. kind of operative sense. But when you go back behind the causal need to control everything, that's where you start to get the fear-based condition. You can start to understand the wounded-based condition and some other factors that are subtle that come into even a developmental level, of which it seems that it's almost by necessity we cannot get outside of the me for a while. And that takes practice. And that's why there's discipline required for any kind of study, any kind of even internal personal growth and development, whether your tradition is yoga, meditation, or studying the Christian Bible or the Quran or whatever. So this is really the lesson for today. It's about praxis, practice. It's about the discipline. It's about what we do in our investigation and how we approach it. I've given you a first tier and a second tier perspective. The second tier perspective I would call a fearlessness psychology or philosophy, a paradigm that is very different from. It's related to that first set of levels of learning, and then there's a shift and a break, which then we can move into a different perspective. So we can have both. We can be aware of us going into that me way of viewing and seeing, and we can also go, oh yeah, I can catch that, and then move outside of it without the need to control it. Because if you're just trying to control that first tier to get to second tier because it's better, it's higher, it's more advanced, it's fearlessness, I want to be fearlessness, that's a trap too. Because that's Krishnamurti. It's brilliant philosophical argument, comes from his work, I think. I'm not saying I agree with everything. I certainly don't. I hear things, I think they're great, and there's things I kind of go, not so sure. And also realize he was teaching back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the world's changed, and fear has changed, and fearlessness has changed to keep up with new thoughts, inventions, new science, new insights, etc., teachings, new synthesis. Okay, on that note, thanks for this today. I would like to say I do not want anybody to think they're doing it wrong in their methodology of managing fear and of studying fear. I would just like to suggest, in all cases, probably mostly, it's inadequate and partial. It can be much more complete, much more integral, much more holistic. And you can bring that as a gift, not only to yourself, but to your circle and the world itself. So thanks very much for this today.